Let me tell you something most people never understand. A person doesn't go crazy out of nowhere. There's always a moment, quiet, invisible, ignored, when the mind finally snaps under a weight it was never meant to carry. And that moment doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't look violent. It doesn't look like chaos. It looks ordinary. It looks like someone staring at the wall a little too long. Like someone laughing at a joke they didn't hear. Like someone who suddenly stops mid-sentence because their thoughts won't line up anymore. That's how madness begins, not with a scream, but with a silence so heavy it suffocates. And for Aaron, the boy who once saw the world in bright colors, that silence was the first sign that something inside him had broken long before he ever realized it. Aaron didn't grow up in a home. He grew up in a place where love felt like a rumor and danger felt like routine. His father walked through the house like a storm trapped in human skin, slamming doors, yelling at shadows, cursing at things no one else could see. His mother floated through rooms like a ghost, present but unreachable, silent in ways that felt louder than screaming. Aaron learned to read moods the way soldiers read landmines. He memorized footstep patterns, breathing rhythms, the tension in the walls. What broke him wasn't the violence, it was the invisibility. The moments no one noticed him trembling. The mornings no one asked why his eyes were red. The days he stood in the kitchen doorway hoping someone would say his name. Trauma didn't start as chaos. It started as neglect, a quiet, merciless erosion of being unseen. Children in homes like Aaron's don't grow up. They learn to adapt. They learn to hide. They learn to perform safety instead of feeling it. By the time he was 10, Aaron had already become a shapeshifter, polite in school, funny with friends, agreeable with adults. He became the boy who understood everyone but was understood by no one. People praised him for being mature for his age, never realizing maturity was a disguise he wore to avoid being hurt. He learned early that the world likes people who are easy to handle, so he became light, pleasant, charming. But the truth was darker. Every smile he showed was a mask, every joke he made was armor, and every compliment he received only pushed him deeper into a persona that was slowly killing the real him. Aaron tried to bury it. All of it. He told himself the past was nothing, that he was fine, that surviving meant overcoming. But the body doesn't speak the language of denial. It speaks the language of symptoms. By the time he reached adulthood, his nervous system was a live wire. He jumped at soft noises. He couldn't sleep unless he kept some kind of light on. He felt watched even in empty rooms. His shoulders were always tense, jaw always clenched, heart always beating faster than it should. Trauma doesn't stay in memories, it lives in muscles, in breathing patterns, in reflexes. He didn't understand why he was always on edge. He didn't understand why silence scared him. He didn't understand why he felt unsafe even when nothing was happening. But the truth was simple, his body was still living a childhood his mind tried to forget. Aaron didn't wake up one day with a fractured sense of self. It happened slowly, quietly, the way mirrors crack from the inside. He learned early that certain emotions were forbidden, fear, anger, sadness, so he locked them away like contraband. But feelings don't disappear, they divide. He became two versions of himself, the one the world saw and the one that screamed behind his ribs. The world saw the compliant Aaron, helpful, understanding, always the peacemaker. But the hidden Aaron was tired, overwhelmed, terrified. That split, that forced separation between who he was and who he had to be, became the foundation of his unraveling. The more he had to wear the good boy mask, the more the shadow behind it grew teeth. By adulthood, Aaron's mind had become a theater of echoes, memories whispering through doorways he never opened, fears he couldn't name, tension he couldn't explain. He didn't know that he carried the blueprint of his childhood inside him. He didn't realize he was still flinching at footsteps that no longer existed. He couldn't understand why intimacy terrified him, why silence felt dangerous, why he kept expecting people to explode even when they were calm. He thought something was wrong with him. But trauma is an inheritance, a shadow passed down through unresolved pain, and Aaron's shadow was enormous. It shaped how he loved, how he trusted, how he lived. It taught him that closeness was unpredictable, affection was temporary, and safety was a myth. The thing about holding yourself together for years is that eventually, your hands start shaking. Aaron began losing sleep first, staying awake until sunrise, pacing his apartment, feeling like something was stalking him inside his own mind. Then came the paranoia, not dramatic, but subtle, the way he felt watched through windows, the way strangers' glances felt loaded with meaning, the way every silence felt like the calm before a storm. His thoughts became tangled threads he couldn't pull apart. Friends noticed he was different. They said he was moody, distant, off. But what they didn't understand was that Aaron wasn't changing. He was running out of strength to hide what had always been broken. Eventually, Aaron's psyche began doing something human minds do when overwhelmed. It tried to create order out of disorder. He started seeing patterns that weren't there, messages in radio static, warnings in streetlights flickering, meaning in the randomness of everyday life. His mind, starved for safety, began stitching stories out of shadows to explain the chaos inside him. Not because he was delusional, but because he was drowning. The mind prefers a terrifying explanation over no explanation at all. And for Aaron, every flicker of light became a signal, every whisper a threat, every coincidence a cosmic clue. This wasn't madness. It was terror wearing the mask of understanding. There comes a moment in a person's descent where the mind stops trying to cope and starts trying to survive, and for Aaron, that moment was a night he couldn't explain, standing in front of his bathroom mirror, staring at his own reflection as if it were a stranger watching him back. His face looked normal, but his eyes felt wrong, like they weren't his, like something else was living behind them. He whispered his own name and waited for it to feel familiar, but it didn't. He felt detached from his own skin, as if he were hovering above himself instead of being inside his body. That's the thing about trauma-induced dissociation. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or alarms. It arrives quietly, like a soft click inside the mind that disconnects you from yourself. The world didn't know Aaron had broken, but Aaron knew. He could feel the fracture running through the center of his identity like a fault line deep beneath the earth. To everyone else, Aaron still looked functional. He still went to work. He still smiled at strangers. He still answered messages with short, polite replies. But inside, something was collapsing, a slow implosion of all the emotions he never admitted, all the pain he never voiced. He couldn't focus. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't trust the calmness of any moment because calm had never meant safety in his childhood. He carried a tension so constant it became invisible, like a noise only he could hear. His friends noticed he was acting weird, but they thought it was stress or burnout. They didn't see him waking up at 3 a.m. gasping for air, or writing frantic thoughts in a notebook just to feel anchored, or sitting in the dark trying to stop his mind from inventing threats that weren't there. Aaron wasn't losing his mind, he was losing the battle with memories that had never healed. As the pressure grew, Aaron's brain did what traumatized brains do. It tried to protect him through hypermeaning, making everything feel symbolic, coded, dangerous. A stranger's glance felt like a threat. A repeated number on a clock felt like a secret message. A flickering streetlight felt like a warning from the universe. His mind wasn't breaking, it was overcompensating. It was trying to interpret the world the way it once had to interpret his household growing up, every sound a clue, every silence suspicious, every change in tone meaningful. His childhood taught him that danger was everywhere if he didn't decipher the signs fast enough. So now, as an adult, his mind created signs out of nothing. He wasn't paranoid, he was conditioned. His brain had become a machine built for survival in a world that was no longer dangerous, but still felt like it. It's ironic how the moment someone breaks is also the moment others finally start noticing, not because they were paying attention, but because the mask finally becomes too heavy to hold. Aaron couldn't keep pretending. He stopped showing up to social events. He snapped at people over small things. He forgot conversations. He stared blankly when people talked. He drifted away from everyone he cared about, not out of cruelty, but out of fear that his unraveling would contaminate them. People said he was changing, drifting, acting strange. But they didn't understand he was out of energy, energy to perform normalcy, energy to smile, energy to carry the persona that once kept him safe but now suffocated him. He didn't go crazy. He simply stopped acting. Inside Aaron, a war began, the part of him that wanted help versus the part that feared being seen. Trauma teaches a person two contradictory lessons. You need support, and support is dangerous. So Aaron resisted every instinct to reach out. He wanted someone to ask if he was okay, but the thought of actually answering terrified him. He wanted to be held, but being vulnerable felt like stepping into fire. He wanted someone to understand him, but the idea of exposing what was happening inside his mind felt shameful, risky, humiliating. Childhood had taught him that asking for help was punished, not rewarded, so now as an adult, even empathy felt threatening. He wasn't isolating because he didn't care, he was isolating because connection felt like opening a wound that had been stitched shut with barbed wire. As Aaron's mind spiraled further, the boundary between thought and reality blurred. He began hearing echoes of conversations that never happened, snippets of arguments from the past replaying like scratched vinyl in his head. Sometimes they felt like voices, not foreign ones, but intensified versions of his own thoughts, amplified into storms he couldn't shut off. He started writing pages of fragmented sentences, ideas that connected only in the logic of his suffering. The world around him became symbolic. The hum of the refrigerator felt like a coded message. The reflection in a window felt like a duplicate self watching him. The wind rattling the door sounded like someone trying to get in. This wasn't psychosis born of chaos, it was psychosis born of meaning. The mind, in desperation, trying to translate pain into something understandable. People around Aaron reacted the way society always reacts to the unraveling, with fear, confusion, or judgment. They whispered about him. They called him dramatic, unstable, losing it. No one asked why. No one asked what had lived inside him for years before this collapse. Madness is never understood by the ones who didn't witness the buildup. They only see the explosion, never the decades of sparks leading to it. They never saw the nights he cried silently into his pillow, the mornings he stayed in bed because the world felt hostile, the childhood where emotional safety never existed. They didn't see the child who learned to be strong too early. They didn't see the teenager who survived by pretending. They didn't see the adult who broke alone. Society fears the symptom but ignores the origin, labeling the wounded instead of understanding the wound. Here is the truth no one wants to admit. People don't go crazy because they're weak. They go crazy because they were strong for too long. Aaron didn't collapse because he failed. He collapsed because he carried burdens meant for entire families, because he survived years of emotional landmines, because he endured loneliness disguised as normal life. His breakdown was not a failure of sanity. It was the breaking of silence. Madness is the psyche's final protest, the moment your mind refuses to hide your wounds anymore. All the suppressed grief rises. All the unspoken fear surfaces. All the ignored trauma demands to be heard. Madness is not the creation of a new self. It is the return of every abandoned part of you, arriving all at once, demanding recognition. Most people think the shadow self is a metaphor, but for someone like Aaron, it felt real, like another version of him walking half a step behind, whispering old memories into his ear, reminding him of pain he never resolved. This shadow wasn't evil, it was neglected. It carried every emotion he repressed, every truth he buried, every fear he swallowed to survive. And now, the shadow wasn't staying quiet anymore. It showed up in dreams where rooms collapsed around him. It showed up in waking moments when he felt hands on his shoulders that weren't there. It showed up in flashes of rage he couldn't control. Carl Jung said that what we ignore within ourselves eventually rules us, and Aaron was experiencing that prophecy firsthand. The shadow he abandoned as a child had become the adult he feared. Aaron's world began bending in small, unsettling ways. Objects felt heavier in his hands. Colors seemed sharper than they should. Time stretched during moments of panic and collapsed during moments of numbness. Sounds echoed too long, as if bouncing inside a hollow skull. The edges of reality felt loose, like wallpaper peeling back to reveal something underneath. He knew, logically, that nothing had changed, but trauma doesn't follow logic. Trauma rewires perception. He wasn't hallucinating, he was drowning in his own nervous system. Every unopened text felt like a threat. Every knock at the door felt dangerous. The world didn't become scarier, his inner world did. And eventually, the inside shapes how you see the outside. It happened on a quiet night, not during an argument, not during a crisis, not during anything dramatic. Aaron was sitting alone on his bed, staring at a tiny crack in the wall, and something inside him simply broke. Not loudly, not violently. It was like a soft click, the sound of a lock turning. His thoughts scattered like marbles dropped on a wooden floor. He felt detached from his own body, as if floating behind himself. A voice inside whispered, "This world isn't real," but beneath that voice was the real message, "This pain is too much." That's what people misunderstand about mental collapse. It isn't an explosion, it's surrender. It's the psyche choosing fragmentation over suffocation. The mind gives up not because it's weak, but because it's done fighting alone. After that night, Aaron's pain stopped hiding. It spoke through racing thoughts, through trembling hands, through paranoia that felt more like prophecy. He started writing obsessively, words, symbols, shapes, phrases repeating over and over until his notebook looked like it belonged to a man trapped between nightmares. He wasn't writing for clarity, he was writing for survival. Pain became a language he could finally understand. Every line he scribbled was a cry he never voiced as a boy. Every page was a memory he tried to drown but resurfaced stronger. Madness doesn't create new monsters, it reveals old wounds. Aaron's breakdown wasn't the beginning of insanity. It was the beginning of honesty. Aaron didn't walk into therapy looking for healing. He walked in looking for relief from the storm in his head. He sat across from the therapist with shaking hands, forcing himself to speak even though his throat felt locked shut. He told them he felt unreal, that his thoughts were loud, that his memories didn't line up anymore. They gave him labels: anxiety, depression, dissociation, but labels don't heal wounds. Labels don't undo a childhood. Labels don't reorganize a collapsing psyche. Therapy didn't make him feel better immediately, it actually made things worse. Because for the first time, he had to say out loud things he had buried so deeply he thought they had died. Healing doesn't begin with comfort. Healing begins with chaos, the chaos that erupts when the truth is no longer willing to stay silent. As the months passed, something unexpected happened. The same shadow that once terrified Aaron began revealing itself not as a monster, but as a messenger. The rage he suppressed showed him where he had been silenced. The grief he avoided showed him what he had lost. The fear he carried showed him what he had survived. Bit by bit, he began realizing that the parts of himself he believed were crazy were actually the parts he ignored the longest. Jung once wrote that the shadow is not darkness, it is the light we refuse to look at. Aaron's descent into madness was not a curse, it was a confrontation with everything he abandoned to survive. And in that confrontation, something he never expected appeared: clarity. Healing didn't come like a miracle, it came like sunrise, slowly, quietly, almost unnoticeably at first. Aaron started sleeping again, not because the nightmares disappeared, but because he finally stopped running from them. He started speaking honestly in therapy, letting the tears come instead of swallowing them. He reconnected with his body, grounding himself in small, simple rituals: breathing, stretching, journaling, touching the earth with bare hands. He wasn't fixed, but he wasn't drowning either. The version of him that once shattered began piecing himself back together, not into who he was before the trauma, but into someone who understood it. For the first time in his life, he wasn't pretending. The madness had forced him into the one thing he avoided his entire life: being real. In the end, Aaron discovered something the world rarely admits: going crazy wasn't the destruction of his life, it was the revelation of it. Madness was never the enemy. It was the message. The protest. The cry of a soul abandoned too long. When he finally faced his demons, they didn't devour him. They thanked him for listening. Because healing isn't becoming someone new, it's remembering who you were before the world taught you to bury your voice, your pain, your truth. Aaron didn't escape his past, he reclaimed it. And the mind that once fractured didn't stay broken, it rebuilt itself around honesty, not fear. If you've ever felt like you're losing your mind, don't mistake the collapse for the ending. Sometimes the breakdown is the door. And on the other side of that door is the person you were always meant to become.